your names. And we definitely don't need to spotlight me either. Okay, cool. So colleagues, welcome. These days, what I'm trying to do is imagine if we were all in a place, say we were at a conference somewhere warm and nice, and we were all just sort of walking into the room. So you would be bringing your coffee, you would be bringing your notes, you would be bringing whatever you've been thinking about in the morning or a particular challenge in the office. And we'd be sort of probably talking on the edges of the meeting. We wouldn't be sitting down in our chairs yet. Anyway, this is what I'm imagining and bringing in as an ode to a different way of interacting than the digital one, especially for our last dialogue. So welcome to everybody. And as you're coming in, like we normally do, if you can just pop a quick hello in the chat and let us know where in the world you're joining us from. And hello to Nepal. Hi, Sam. We'll just give it one or two more minutes. Hello, Charles. Thanks for putting, and for those of you that want to put your camera on, we don't put you under pressure to put your camera on, but it's always nice to see each other if you want to. Jürgen, I'm just going to take it for granted that there's a smiley face in real life, as you've put it in the chat too, so thank you. Charles from the beautiful mountains of Lesotho. Glad that you could join us. And Rogers, I want to believe that this picture that you have is Vic Falls. Am I right? Is this Vic Falls in your picture? Well, you can put in the chat if it is, but it looks like that from here, which is nice to see. Okay, colleagues, I'm gonna kick us off, and colleagues can continue to come in. We have 90 minutes, but it always goes a lot faster than we think it's going to. So welcome to our final global dialogue on transforming systems in the decade of action. What have we been up to in this space? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is an initiative for several of you. You're aware that we started last year, really in the earlier phases of the COVID disruption, and we saw this as an opportunity for us to connect to each other, really overcoming the divide that many of us were facing in the isolation that COVID required of all of us. But it was more than that. I mean, I think what many of us were sensing was a shift in perspective on the way that we approach development challenges, the way that we approach ourselves, and a real interest, a keenness to connect with each other in ways that we can translate that kind of transformation into our work environment. So it becomes a question of, do I want to do things differently? Yes. Is COVID an opportunity for a radical reimagination? Fine. How? What does it look like? How would we practically do that? And how can we connect as a community to do that? Because none of us can do it on our own. So there's been a real spirit of collaboration towards those collective shifts that we've started to create. We've walked through, and Otto will go through this in some detail with our other colleagues from the Presencing Institute. Over the course of 5 different sessions, we've looked at different aspects of transformation and building leadership capabilities that would allow us to translate that into action in our different environments. And we want to do a couple of things today. We want to take stock of that. For those of you who haven't been along the whole journey, let's sort of open up that experience to many of you. And we want to use the opportunity today really for 2 things. One, there's no external speaker. You know, often we bring in a thought leader to contribute and disrupt and be a bit provocative for us in the way that we're considering systems transformation in our work. But today we're keeping the reflection on us, and that's really important. So we're going to utilize our breakout rooms today, and we want this to be an opportunity for you, for your voice, for your agency, and for your contribution to how we're going to evolve this initiative going forward. We want to hold this space and we want to grow it in a way that's meaningful for you, this community that's focused on awareness-based collective action, awareness-based systems change. So we'll be walking through some of this, and we hope that both with the journaling exercises that Otto will lead, the smaller group discussions and the resonance, which we'll take forward in plenary, we'll start to get a sense of where the energy is for you, where the opportunities are in this particular work as a collective. What's different from last year, we've been very intentional in this dialogue series and in our Action Learning Lab. This is across the UN system. And that is the spirit that we want to continue. But we want to hear more from you. So this is really a session for you and for us. And with that, I will hand it over to Otto to take us through a short trip down memory lane. Time is such an elastic concept, but we did start these dialogue series in January. So we're going to take a look back at where we've been over the course of the first 6 months of the year. Otto, over to you. Everyone, welcome.
Thank you, Laurel, and colleagues, friends. Hello, everyone, and welcome also to this closing session here of this series. It was really great going back, and I will share some of that, some of the earlier sessions and some of the highlights. We'll go over that in a moment. But before doing that, I want to just double click on something that came up in many recent conversations with some of you and with your colleagues, which is the current moment we are in and what is asked of us as we look at the remainder of the decade of action and the decade of transformation. And one simple way of framing what we are trying to do, or what we have been trying to do throughout this series, is really in terms of something you're all familiar with, which is complexity. So we all deal with complexity in as leaders and as change makers. And as you probably know, there's like two fundamental distinctions, right? Two different types of complexity. One is dynamic complexity. Cause and effect are distant in space and time. So basically, what happens here may have been caused on the other side of the planet, or may have been caused decades or centuries ago. And social complexity really is about actors having different views, mental models, cultural assumptions, and interests, of course, right? So, and how to deal with that. But what we are seeing is that there is a third type of complexity. And that third type of complexity, I like to describe as emerging complexity. And emerging complexity is that we basically deal with disruption, and that not only the solutions to our problems are unknown, often the problem itself keeps unfolding. So what we thought yesterday the problem was has changed because the issue keeps changing. So the perfect example, of course, being COVID. So a new variant showing up, right? So what it is and what's asked of us is changing by the day. So the three defining features of emerging complexity is the solution is unknown, the problem is also partly unknown, keeps changing, and number three, it's not clear who you need to convene around the table to solve this issue. So you're clear about some stakeholders, but you're not clear about others. So, and then I think many leadership challenges that many of the most important leadership challenges today fall into this third category. When you look at the management tools, we have a lot great methods and tools for dynamic complexity, right? It's basically a whole systems approach. And there are many ways, right? Great ways of simulating tools and the dynamic complexity. Social complexity, sometimes also called behavioral complexity. Yeah, we have multi-stakeholder approaches, right? So we know how to deal with that. But when it comes to emerging complexity, kind of that dealing with disruption and with problems that keep changing, that's really a challenge. And that's where the sensing and presencing capacity are really at the core. And that's why we are training them here. We are training them in the Action Learning Lab. Some of you are participating in that more intense journey of capacity building. But we also, in a way, have been practicing that a little bit here in the dialogue series, because the sensing and connecting, sensing current reality from all the different angles, that's what we have been practicing, but also then sensing into the deeper possibilities that maybe are wanting to emerge. And so that to hone, to cultivate, to develop our own sensing and presencing capacities really requires different holding spaces, different practice fields. And that's kind of what we have been doing a little bit. So this is at our kickoff. That's our first graphic capture here from visual summary from Kelvie. And it was, it was really interesting to watch that again, because it was a day after the inauguration here, right? And you see at the bottom right, this wonderful Amanda Gorman quote: "The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there's always light. If only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it." Amanda, and then during the session, spontaneously, Achim Steiner showed up, and we had a wonderful exchange with him. And it started really kind of with this. It started really with this image that came. Is the closing image of the summer series that we did together with him, and where he talked about freeing the spirit in a paradigm of liberation. So he also talked about that, and I found that really interesting, about when he entered the UNDP, the observation of organizational self-doubt. We have all these capacities, but it's the doubt that sometimes is in the way of activating our own agency. He also talked about the origins of the UN in the darkest hour of the 20th century in 1941. 1945, he said, the idea became reality right on the ashes of a war that was still burning. Free the spirit, not as an ego exercise, but as a purpose-led consciousness of the extraordinary potential that we have when we act together. Then in the second session, we were joined by Danica Littlechild and Melanie Goodchild. And we took a different perspective on our current system. And I thought it was interesting that, some of us responded afterwards. So why are we doing that? And that was so uncomfortable, right? So it was, certainly looking at our own system, the UN system, from that perspective, revealed some very uncomfortable blind spots. And I think it's really important to remember that as a leader, if you always stay inside your comfort zone, you're probably not really doing your work, right? So in this century, going to the edge of the comfort zone is a core capacity, because otherwise we are not really able to facing our own blind spots. So Danica talked about 1977, the first time indigenous people were allowed to set foot on the ground of the UN, which wasn't possible before. And Melanie shared with us from her own tradition, kind of the prophecies, kind of that have been guiding her and her community by way of linking it to the Anthropocene. She said Anthropocene is the seventh fire prophecy, destroying Mother Earth, and then the eighth fire prophecy, as she called it, is to restore sacred relationship with Mother Earth, to rekindle the fire. And when we then had Julia joining us for the next session, interestingly, and you see it in the image here, kind of the human shape holding the planet, that was exactly kind of what was embodying planetary consciousness. That was exactly kind of where we picked up on. So Julia talked about planetary consciousness. How do we shift our relationship to the planet from using it as a resource to a stewardship-based sacred relationship that we cultivate, which of course is also reflected in the framing of the Human Development Report that, as Pedro, who also joined the session, shared with us. And Pedro's focus really was on human agency at the core. How do we bridge, he asked, individual change towards collective change? And then in the last session, we were joined by Kate Rayworth and Jamila Mahmood. And Kate really emphasized her experience, which is there are change makers everywhere. If you give them useful tools, they just run with it. And you see also here the donut economic concept, which basically is realizing the SDGs by way of respecting the planetary boundaries, right? So that's what the donut concept really is. And that was her one of her main observations that struck me, kind of that she shared with us. And then Jamila emphasized that the most important infrastructure is our mindset, is our capacity to unlearn and relearn, as you see also captured in the bottom right. Then I asked them in the end, what advice do you have for the community of change makers that we are in this dialogue series? And Kate said, there are change makers everywhere. How can the UN work with people in ways that provide grounded change makers with open tools that allow them to change their system? And Jamila said, start local, make things happen, and grow it from there. So those were, I found their two experiences, also specifically this advice, really interesting and relevant because they have been inside the system, they have been outside the system, and they're very much connected to significant change going on. So that's why I think their input is really pointing into an interesting direction for us. So I now want to give you a little moment of journaling to let kind of these kind of 5 golden nuggets sink in. And I will give you one question for each. So as you remember, journaling is just requires just your pen and a piece of paper. And I will give you one question at a time and 1 minute to just jot down your response. Number 1. Emerging complexity. So when you remember kind of emerging complexity, the solution is not known. The problem keeps changing, and it's not totally clear who you need to convene to solve the issue. Emerging complexity. What are examples of emerging complexity that you face in your area of responsibility right now? Just put down 1, 2, or 3. Challenges that have the characteristics of emerging complexity. Okay. Number two, Achim, right? Achim talked about freeing the spirit of this organization. So which really means, I mean, what is the spirit? The spirit is, what is it that I experience, right, when I entered the organization, the highest future potential, right? It's a dormant capacity. And how much is that awake in my everyday life and work and interaction, right? So freeing the spirit of this organization. When you just review the last few weeks and months, right? The first 5 months of this year, where have you seen it? So just be factual. Where have you experienced moments where you saw a glimpse of that spirit showing up? A glimpse of that highest future potential manifesting in your experience. Just write down when and where that was. It can be tiny, that doesn't matter. But did you feel it? Did you experience that? Or is that just an abstract concept, very remote from your own experience? Number three. Now we come to Danica and Melanie, and really the issue of the blind spot. And back then in the journaling, I asked you about the blind spot. So where's the blind spot in your system right now? In other words, stakeholders like indigenous peoples, at least in earlier times, currently still, stakeholders that are currently underattended to, that are not receiving the listening and the attention that they deserve. So when you look at your own area of responsibility, what are some of the most important blind spots? So stakeholders you are not listening to sufficiently at this point. Just that was the question I asked. And the question I'm asking now is, what stakeholders are in the blind spot of your system right now? So just remember that. And what have you been doing, or what could you do to listen to them? Just review maybe micro steps that you took over the past few weeks and months, or if not, that you might be taking going forward over the next few weeks and months. So number three is blind spot. What stakeholders that are in the blind spot of your system or ecosystem right now? And what have you been doing, or what could you do to listen to them? Number four, now we come to Melanie and Julia and the issue of planetary consciousness, shifting our relationship to Earth from a resource to a living being, to a sacred relationship. Where have you felt something like that? So the concept is clear, right? We look into the HDR, but where have you felt it? So it could have been a little moment, maybe in one of the stillness moments we had in this series. It could be when you were outside. So where was it that you took a little moment and connected with the land, connected with planet Earth, connected with the living being of our planet, with Gaia, in a different way. Might have been the journaling moment when Gaia spoke to us. And if so, what was it? And then number 5, and lastly, we come to Kate and to Jamila. Change makers are everywhere. So how can you reimagine your work in ways that empowers and activates the change makers that are everywhere? So how could you reimagine the UN you do in your context of the UN around the global movement building that is called for now in order to achieve the 2030 agenda? All right, try to finish up your reflections on that. We'll return to that in a little moment when we come to the breakout. But before we move into smaller group conversations where you can share your own experience of what we are discussing here, I want to introduce one more distinction, and we are wanting to invite you to do a collective self-assessment here a little bit. And as you may remember last time in the introduction to Kate, I introduced this matrix. It's basically when, summarizing systems thinking and systems evolution in terms of the smartphone, right? So it's that, what we can do with the smartphone is loading an app or upgrading the operating system, and that systems change very much is related to the latter. And then, I differentiated 4 different operating systems and, went over how they apply to health and learning, right? From input-centric to output-centric and efficiency, to outcome and user-centric, like patient-centric medicine, patient-centric learning, to 4.0, something I called co-creative and ecosystem-centric. I applied it also to farm and food, right? From industrial to organic to regenerative to finance with extractive to impact and ESG to regenerative and to governance, right? Visible hand, invisible hand, organized interest groups and awareness-based collective action. And then to the concept of development, right? From GDP to HDI, to planetary pressure, adjusted HDI and donut and so forth. So that's what we went over last time. And the point here is something very simple. The point is, going back, you all know the Einstein quote, we cannot solve the problems that we face with the same thinking that created them. And so how it applies here is that we cannot solve the 4.0 challenges that we face in our society right now by just activating response mechanisms that are grounded in 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0, right? That's not enough. We need to learn how to activate this 4.0 way of leading and collaborating and co-creating on an ecosystem level. And when you double click on that, you can really say it has to do with the evolution of management and the evolution of leadership. What is really management? So a simple way of defining is management is about getting things done at the end of the day, right? So 1.0 is getting things done by your team. Yeah, you just tell people what to do. Then 2.0 output efficiency, it's more getting things done efficiently, right? So that means maybe management by objective. It can also mean you outsource things, kind of you get it done, but more efficiently and effectively maybe. Then 3.0 is what you all know, right? Because that's your everyday challenge, which is the network leadership challenge. And what is the network leadership challenge? It's for you to be successful in your job, you need to get things done through others that don't report to you, right? Who are in other parts of an organization or of the same organization or in a different organization. So that's the multi-stakeholder or the network leadership challenge. And we are quite familiar with that. And then the fourth one is transformative, right? Getting things done collectively. So that's kind of, remember the emerging complexity when we really need to activate collective responses and change the way we collectively operate. So if you take that as a grid, right, then, and this is kind of the distinction I want to invite you to really, and it's also a summary a little bit of what we have been discussing. I have been introducing, I think, in the second session, the 4 levels of listening. But here I will extend that to the levels of conversation. So the first level of listening conversation is really just, reconfirming what we already know and talking nice. And that's, when you operate on 1.0, that's still sufficient there. That often works. But the moment you go to number 2, you really need to be more factual, right? You need to really pick up new information, and you need a discussion that's not just polite, right? Where you're not just pleasing your bosses, but debate and talking tough really means, bringing in, attending to challenges that we face and having a real conversation, not just a polite conversation. 3.0, right? The moment we shift to outcome and user-centric ways of operating, we need empathic listening. We need to be able to see the situation through the eyes of others. We need to be able to move from debate to dialogue. Debate, we are basically stuck in our own viewpoint, inside our own viewpoint. But with dialogue, I can move around the topic, see it from my angle, from your angle, from somebody else's angle, and then return and see it from the whole. So that's number 3. It's a different kind of way of listening and conversation that is required of us. And then as you move to number 4, you even need to deepen that. Generative listening is really moving into presence and flow. And generative conversation really is about collective creativity, accessing kind of the co-creative spirit, if you want, of your team or of the stakeholder situations you're dealing with. Levels of organizing, right? If we look at the evolution of how we organize, we have moved, and we are in each organization. It's kind of a different, you start there centralized, right? First entrepreneurial, then maybe a bureaucracy later on. Decentralization, right? Moving into divisions and functional or regional or divisional differentiation is the next language that we develop, right? You have all the different agencies, you know that well. Networked, right? That means in order to get stuff done, we really need to now, in networked organizing, it's really about the quality of relationships to mobilize action. And ecosystemic really is to look at the whole ecosystem, the whole set of partners that we need to connect with in order to get things done as a living organism, as Achim said. So, and then in terms of governance, right? So this is what we already went over, kind of the visible hand, the invisible hand, organize coalitions, you could say. It's maybe better than lobbying here. So building coalitions and awareness-based collective action. All right. So that's the distinction, right? And what I'm basically saying is, okay, the more we have challenges that require us to respond on this level, the more we need to develop the entire vocabulary here, right? So if you are an organization that needs to respond on all 4 levels, but the only vocabulary you have developed is in the first 2 levels, that's probably a problem. But I want to leave it up to you. And then before we now go to the breakout groups, we want to invite you to a collective assessment of where you see your system currently operating, on which level, in terms of listening, in terms, so is it level 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, in terms of conversation. So where's the main? So is it mostly polite, or is it mostly kind of debate style? Is it dialogic, really moving into each other's perspectives? Or do you see this, collective creativity? What's the dominant mode right now? And then same with organizing, right? Because organizations are geometries of power, right? Kind of, and that's about decision making. What is the decision making structure, right, that you have? So which of these 4 patterns are applicable in your experience of the UN system as you experience it? And then governance, right? So what is the dominant mode here? So we are going to ask you to assess, number 1, the dominant mode of operating today around these 4 levels. And then after that, we are going to ask you if we want to really achieve the SDG agenda by 2030, what is the required mode of operating for us right now? And with that, I hand it over to Antoinette.
Thank you, Otto. So we will move directly to asking that question in an interactive way. So I'm going to share my screen here so that we can look at this together. What I'd like you to do is go to, at the top of the screen says go to menti.com and use this code. We'll also put the link in the chat so that you can click directly on it, but you may need another screen, or you may be able to do it right on the screen that you're using for Zoom. Just go to another window and open menti.com and use the code 78983544. And the link is here, and we will be able to see the results of this in real time. There we go. So current primary operating mode, and just in case you need a reminder, here is the image that Otto just shared. So where do we see the current primary operating mode? Listening, conversing, organizing, governing. And I'll give us some time. I know that technology is always fun. There are 3 votes in. So now's the time to interact, return to your screen, come to menti.com and use this code. Where do you see the current primary operating mode of the UN system? Okay, results are coming in. And we can watch them come in together. So if you're off the Zoom screen, once you've done your results, you can start to see current primary operating mode. And once you've done that, the first one, it's self-paced, so you should already be moving in. Yep, there are already 5 of us that have voted on the second question, which is what Otto just asked. If we're really going to move towards these SDGs, what is the SDG required operating mode for the UN system? So how would we really need to operate? So we've got 40 votes in on the first one. And just a reminder, as you're voting, if you'd like to look at the Zoom screen, listening, conversing, organizing, governing are the options and where we are on each of those. So it looks like there are 50 votes in, and we're in the twos. So we're sort of in factual debate, decentralized. There's some divisions. We're in the kind of our governing mode is sort of competitive competition. So we'll keep voting on that. And where we are required to be is definitely moving towards the 3+. So we need to be moving towards empathic. We're at 40 votes there. So we'll let the 15 or so who have just voted on the first one vote, and a reminder of the image. Getting close to 60 votes. So just seeing where we are, and we're going to put this into a graph so that we can see this together, and kind of look at these side by side. So we're really in the twos, the 2.0, 2.1, 2.3. And where we need to be, it looks like we're moving towards 3.0, 3.2. Good. So we're at 62 and 48. So we're missing a few of us, 15 or so, who voted on one but didn't get to question 2. So go to question 2. What is required? What is our operating mode that's required to really reach our goals as a UN system? 50 of us have voted. We're getting a pretty clear picture though. So we're in the 2.0 in the current mode, and 3+ required. So I'll let Emma pull up the bar graph. "52 have voted and 62 on the first question. So 10 are not sure or heavily debating where we need to be. And that's okay. We'll give it another 20 seconds for you to vote. That box is growing closer to 4.0. So we're at 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. And here we are still at 2.0, 2.1, 2.3. And so one more reminder of the image.
Perfect. So I'll share my screen now. And Antoinette, you can switch over to mine.
Great. Emma, you ready?
Yeah, it looks like we just needed a.
There it is. Thanks, Emma. So just sitting with this for a moment, the gray is our current operating mode, just seeing these two side by side. And the gold is the SDG required operating mode. So there's a leap, there's a gap that we need to cross here. Otto, do you want to share anything about this image, what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting so that it is so reliable, right? So it seems to be the same across these four variables. So it means like on listening, really moving from factual listening, right? Attending to the facts, to empathic listening, to really seeing a situation through the eyes of another stakeholder. It means in terms of conversation to move from debate to dialogue. Debate, basically my point of view versus your point of view, defending our perspectives and claims and viewpoints towards inquiry, right? Towards dialogue, towards a process of genuinely thinking together and making the system see itself. In organizing, it means kind of from a centralized and divisionalized structure to a network structure, right, where we learn to better collaborate across silos, essentially. And in terms of governance, it means that we move from, the traditional mechanisms to more multi-stakeholder constellations where we work together. That is more and more complementing the traditional mechanisms of hierarchy and competition. So I think that's what we are seeing here. And as we now move into the groups, it would be really interesting how you see that showing up in your own area of responsibility. So when you look into what you're actually facing right now, where does that show up, right? So and that with that we mean the gap, right? That the current primary mode is on level 2, as just explained, around these 4 variables. But if we want to upgrade the operating mode, we needed to shift the way we connect with each other, the way we listen, the way we converse, the way we have decision-making structures, the way we organize, right? And the way we translate governance into coordination mechanisms. So that's what we are. How does it show up in your area of responsibility, and where do you see your own agency? Where could you move the dial from here to there, from how we operate now to what is required of us, how we should be operating in order to achieve the 2030 agenda?
Great. So we are going to move into breakouts around those 2 questions that Otto just asked, and I've just put them in the chat. And this is the moment to tune into what Laurel asked us at the beginning. What does it actually take? So we're going to move into breakouts and turn to each other. And we'll spend 15 minutes in the breakouts. So you can share your name, where you're coming from, your thoughts around these 2 questions. And this is also an opportunity to practice this deeper level of listening to each other, really giving each other the space to be heard in that time, and see what comes up together. So enjoy your time together. We'll see you back here in 15 minutes. If you're looking for your breakout, it should have a box that just popped up on your screen. And if not, at the bottom of your screen, it should say breakouts, and you will be able to get in there from that little button.
Antoinette, I would just add for those that are still here,
It looks like we're all back. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great breakout, and would love to hear insights that have come up, perhaps in the chat or over voice and video. And if you'd like to do that, you can either unmute yourself or use the raise hand function. If you'd like to, if there are a lot of comments, we can do that, but you can click on the reactions button and raise hand, and we'll see that you're ready to speak, or you can type directly in the chat. What came up? What did you feel as the movement that's required to move us, to get us there? And Laurel, perhaps you want to come in and invite us as well.
well, colleagues, thank you. I mean, I think we had an interesting walkthrough and a beautiful set of visuals. So thank you, Kelby, as always, of where we've been, and some real prompts and considerations from Otto. And then we were able to see what that looks like in terms where we think we are now as a UN system, and what we aspire to be and do for the decade of action, where that gap is. So I'm just very curious what the conversation was like, what's come up for you, where your energy is, where you think there's opportunity and moments that we can seize and capitalize on as a collective. So like Antoinette, I would say, please just hop in, and we can talk about it together. Eva, please.
Thank you, Laura. Well, one of the things that came out in our group was that indeed many of us inhabit a big bureaucratic system. But one of the things that gave us hope is that many of us do inhabit smaller teams and are led by managers that have empowered us to lead. And we have been energized by these managers that have essentially flattened the hierarchy within our teams. And that has made a big difference. So we just shared that this gave us hope, that this type of energy essentially gave us hope for the future and for the movement. So that besides the fact that we inhabit this larger bureaucratic system, that these smaller groups, these smaller teams led by an energized manager can actually make the difference. So continuing with this theme from the administrator, where one single manager can make a difference, where one individual can make a difference. It was this theme about how one manager can actually flatten the hierarchy within the team, and how that can essentially change the whole structure within one system.
Eva, fantastic. Happy to hear that. And I mean, I wonder a little bit the extent to which that resonated with other colleagues, if that's something that any of you attribute to the disruption of COVID and the different way that we're living and interacting with each other, if these are sort of things that have also helped to drive. And I guess a question that I have back to you all is, what does this mean in terms of the role of all of us as change makers to empower others, right? So how do we maintain, how do we build that collective from where we are and our agency and our ability to sort of to act and take this forward. Ava, thanks so much. Others who'd like to come in.
One point that came out in our group discussion was also to think, I mean, on top of the leadership, the skills that we are developing here, and also for, with other initiatives in the organization, in other organizations, is that as we take the different leaders, the different that are emerging and changing, the different skills that we are obtaining, that we also need to open up the dialogues in terms of the internal structures and in particular the incentive structures that we have or within the organizations to behave and respond in certain ways. And so in that is a space where our agency is possible, because we are the ones that can actually open those dialogues with those that can actually decide to change those incentive structures.
Thanks, Gonzalo. I think thinking about institutional structures and incentives, it makes a lot of sense, especially going through this journey and the opportunity to build this collective and this group over the past 6 months. These are really key questions, and I think the other side of it is that there's any one individual that can tackle this. So I really do believe that, and it's across entities, right? We're looking to shift culture. So thanks, Gonzalo, for sharing that really useful insights. Others that would like to come in, Lee, I see that you had put a point in the chat. I don't know if you want to share it, which you don't have to, but if you'd like to.
Actually, it was something that Gonzalo said. He was in the same group, but it is this idea, and it rang so true, is that, you know, whenever we want to do something, somebody will say, oh, we need a template for that, or, you know, use the template. And it's always this, it's almost like a psychological construct that, you know, we don't go out of the template, use the template, don't, you know, it's this kind of thing that we're operating within. And we don't, we don't reward people to break out and test and sometimes fail, you know, so it's that idea.
Thanks, Lee.
Can I jump in with 3 comments?
Yes, please. Mooney, is that you?
It is, but don't hold that against me.
Hi, Mooney. Come in, please.
Hi there. So I was in a group, and full confession, I had some missed glitches in the presentation pieces because of connection problems. So Otto, I'm going to get a lot of what you say wrong, and you can feel free to jump down my throat accordingly. But the first thing I observed was a hesitancy and reluctance within our breakout group. And I don't think it was a hesitancy or a reluctance because we don't have ideas. It's just a question of how we articulate them. And this goes to the point of leadership, which was, I think, referenced earlier. Yes, we have the idea of leadership coming in from managers to flatten structures and to encourage us to take risks, but we don't always act on those opportunities because of that reluctance. Because we don't know, because we're afraid to look dumb or make mistakes or seem naive, or to say the dreaded 3 words, I don't know. But it should always be followed with, but let me get back to you on that and see if I can figure that out. And so the nice thing, however, in that reluctance, however, is that despite that hesitancy and baby steps in terms of everyone raising their hand or trying to talk, the space was created for open conversation, and everyone was heard, and to the extent that they wanted to volunteer without, I got a sense of any sort of demand that they do so, and with encouragement for them to extend their opportunity. So creating that safe space and then having the courage to act in that safe space is part 1. Part 2 is on COVID and opportunities. And I was thinking about this from the context of the number of meetings we've had. And this isn't about Zoom fatigue, etc. It's about access across time zones. So we abused this thoroughly this year. In any given year, we normally have about 50 to 60 bilaterals or meetings per group of donors that we operate under for engagement with different parts of the UNDP system. In 2020, that went up to 150. So almost 3 times, and not just peripheral meetings, but the opportunity to grab colleagues from capitals and in the field and connect them together, time zones notwithstanding, to actually start having these more robust conversations that are less about hierarchy and, well, what's the right level of the person or the protocol to actually engage in this, but actually say, I just need someone who can talk intelligently towards this thing in a creative manner. Because Zoom flattened a lot of those considerations for meetings and how many people are in the room to allow that conversation to take place. And as a result, a lot of co-creation was happening across the board with different donors and colleagues in the field for initiatives that they wanted to run forward with. Lastly, I'll just say a comment on incentives, which I think is an interesting point that was just raised. And it struck me that I recall earlier on, we had these opportunities where through the executive office, we were invited as a collective to provide submissions for some innovative ideas. And then secondly, to do a similar thing with UNICEF for actions that we wanted to try out in the field. And while I personally didn't engage in that, I did toy with the idea with my group to see if we can get something moving forward on it. But it was heartening to see that that sort of gamification or incentivization of groups coming together to submit something and actually get funding and recognition towards exercising it was a great way that our hierarchical structure allowed others from across the board to jump in to try to innovate and shift the needle a little bit in terms of how we do things. And speaking to what Otto had said on terms of the management structures, it's that 3.0 and 4.0 that I think a lot of us get stuck on. The idea of doing things more collaboratively and then doing things for transformational purposes. So those are my quick reflections. Over.
Mooney, thank you, really valuable. And I think one of the things that's come up across a couple of the dialogues that we've had is, to your point on access. So the opportunity in COVID and with the digital space is that we all come together in a way that we probably wouldn't have in real life, right? Like budgets and time and getting everybody in the same room. But the other thing that several of you have mentioned in different fora as well too is this new level of pressure to constantly be visibly delivering. So Mooney, that's also what I think about when I hear your comment back about, say, 20 or so bilaterals, and then there's 150 of them. And what does that mean for the work that we want to do, which is a longer term endeavor? To me, it comes back to me to a question of transactionality and those level 1 sort of skills and so on, and a risk, I think, that we now feel, because we're all on Zoom and we don't see each other in person, constantly need to be delivering. It creates again, I think there's a risk there that we are not able to give ourselves the time. You know, you plant a seed, it takes time. It can't be that every week there's something new and another set of demands for us, particularly in a space that we're trying to create here on transforming systems. So I'd be curious other perspectives on that and how we can build this with that sense of longevity and sustainability in mind, and not feel that there needs to be constantly something to show or say or do, you know, but that we're sort of trusting in a process a little more fundamentally. Frederica, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Laurel. Our group discussion, actually, I wanted to make a couple of points. One builds very much on what Mooney said about access and how got the impression that over the past year or so, the organization has become so much more democratic. There's so much more consultation going on. I hear so much more from colleagues elsewhere. So maybe events or discussions that were closed because they were happening in presence now happen virtually, so many more can participate. So in that extent, I would say that UNDP has gone, like, not just baby steps, like significant steps into hearing ourselves as an organization a lot more. But that doesn't necessarily translate on how we hear our external context. So we are very much focused on generating ideas, but then are we as welcoming of ideas from externals? Like, I'm a project manager. I have beneficiaries to deal with, and I don't think we do enough to actually listen to them, what they want and what they want to tell us. So that level of listening is not really taking place yet, although we're doing so much more in terms of self-reflection, but we risk to be a bit auto-referential in this exercise. And another thing that that was coming in our group was like how our evaluation of where we stand in terms of listening, conversation, organizing governance changes according to what unit of analysis we are using. So we have colleagues at the regional hub level, and then we have country offices and we have projects. And it really just changed how we perceive we are doing. So maybe something that we do really well at a regional level does not translate into something that we do very well at country office level. So maybe that survey that was quite revealing needs to actually account for some nuances that may be linked to what lenses are we using, and how the words of the administrator, how do they translate down the regional and country and sub offices and so on and so forth. So these were a couple of points from our group.
Thanks, Frederique. That's really valuable. I think those are also some important considerations for how we expand and build the space going forward, and how we're inviting others also outside the UN system, right, into this space as well too. Christoph.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, unmute myself. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted, right? Excellent. So yeah, my day-to-day work, I'm working with innovation. So, I'm very familiar with new ways of working, pushing boundaries and trying to change things. But this also led me to reflect on, why is it that we sometimes maybe feel that in an organization like UNDP or the UN system, things might be a little bit slower? What is this bureaucracy, or where does this bureaucracy come from? And I think it has to deal a lot with responsibility, right? In the end, as a UN organization, we have a level of responsibility towards donors, towards taxpayers' money, towards beneficiaries. That is, sometimes even if I look at an RR, it must be intimidating. There's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, right? And if someone has a great idea and asks you to do something new, and you start to feel that responsibility, of course you start to ask for, we heard it before, a template, right? Because you don't want to take wrong steps, because we're not a private sector company. We try something, but if we make a move as UNDP, a lot of eyes are on us, right? And we are a role model in many different ways. And I don't have an answer, right? But I think if you really want to move from the smaller spider web to the bigger spider web, we have to find probably and invent new ways of how we can actually balance this level of responsibility that we have with, I would say, emerging ways of being and working, as we have learned here in this dialogue series, right? And I think maybe for an organization like us, the answers are not developed yet, right? There's no copy and paste. We have to really find our own answer of how we can find this balance between, moving towards a new world and a new state of our system, and still being able to carry that level of responsibility that we have. Sorry, no answers, but just some thoughts.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate all of these, and I think it's resonating also with what colleagues are mentioning in the chat as well, too. Both with Sophia, Brett, I think is also pointing to maybe there's a lot of new initiatives that are happening, but then the point is, yeah, that can be exhausting. So it's also a question of how are we connecting the threads, and more than the sum of our parts, where people are innovating. And as you know well, Christoph, there's a lot of energy that's required for any of that work. So how do we bring it together, in a way that amplifies and reinforces, and doesn't create confusion, Brett, to the point that you had made in the chat, and Fred and Pascal, thanks also for the comments that you've made. Mark, I see your hand, and then others also, please do feel free to pop your hand up or just come on in.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just was, in our group, we had discussed a bit on like the internal incentive structures that are often visible, but sometimes not visible. And a bit on touching on Christoph's point on thinking around the type of work and risks we're doing, and how we might want to think about various accounting methods for that. Because there's, in everyone's day-to-day work, there's the care work, then there might be our innovation work, there's your sort of love work, your sort of risk-taking, something you're very passionate about that you think might drive the organization. And I think it's just thinking on how we could maybe make that more visible in a much more structured way, so that we can take account for it, but we can also incentivize people to reach for some of those things, while at the same time recognizing often what is the care work, what is just the work that needs to be done, and often does get sort of devalued. And I think that's also part of just bringing everyone up together. So I just wanted to share that thought in how we can take those parameters and start thinking on how we can also use our collective intelligence to sort of build accounting structures so that we really know what we're incentivizing inside of our organization as well as outside, touching on the point of duty holders, and then and really trying to optimize using those types of approaches. Thank you.
Mark, thanks. And I think in addition to those accounting structures, the way you're describing it, it's also it's an effort to make visible, so that we start to we can articulate this, we can set value and make investments when we can see it. So how can we sort of understand those various requirements and framing of our work? Are there others who would like to come in? We're coming close to the end of the session, and I want to invite both Otto and Kelvy to come back in. Is there anyone who'd like to come in for some colleagues? Thanks also for the reflections in the chat. And we're going to say a little word at the end about where we're going from here. It's not the end, it continues. But let me first see if there's anybody else who'd like to come in, and then Otto, I'm going to ask you to come in, please. Okay, Otto.
Well, I thought it was really fascinating to listening to and reading also. I think the chat, there's a lot there, concrete material. Just, from the group I was in, maybe two things worth mentioning. There's a lot of talk about change, but that doesn't necessarily translate into behavior, so that kind of the talking, doing, or embodying gap. So as one dimension. And also there was a sense in our group that the real gap is between 1 and 4, right? If you look at how the system, so it's a polite self-assessment. It's partly inside the bubble. If you say 2 to 3 is the problem, and there is and what I also I think see through the chat is, in reality, you really need to a more differentiated assessment, because you have pockets that are on 3 and 4. You have other pockets that are at 2, other pockets that are at 1. So to have a more differentiated analysis, I think, is a really good point. And as we are coming, and maybe on Christian or Christoph's point, the responsibility, linking that, how do we link that, the question you ask, with stepping into the future, stepping into something that's emerging. And that really gets back to the essence of what leadership really is, right? The essence of leadership is the capacity of a system to sense and shape the future, which means to move forward. And that's really the question you have been asking, and the question really also underlying the series. And with that, I turn it back to Antoinette and Kelvy to move on us through the visual resonance.
Thanks, Otto. I'd like, just for time, I'd turn it directly over to Kelvy. Kelvy, do you have anything you want to share? And we can take a look at your image.
I think the only thing that hello everybody. I think the only thing that I would like to share is, well, there are two things. One is just the complexity of integration and trying to reflect back on where we've been over this whole arc and pull forward themes. We've really covered a lot, and I personally look forward to sitting with this to let it sink in a little bit more. And I think that the other thing that really stands out to me is that the seeds of the future are here. Like hearing, the seeds of what we would want to be, the world we want to be living in by 2030 are here in this group. And, that's clear through a lot of the comments that have been made today and throughout. And so, yeah, that's all. The future is already in the present, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Kelvie. So the invitation is to really take a look at this image that Kelvie has shared with us. And we can do that by, in the top corner of the Zoom screen, going to enter full screen. It says view, enter full screen, speaker mode. And you can even hide the thumbnail view. And just sit with this image for a moment that Kelvie has been working on throughout our time here together in our dialogue. And just notice what you see, sense, and feel looking at this image. And when you're ready, you can type into the chat using the prompt, I see, I sense, I feel. Typing into the chat, I see, I sense, I feel. And I'll read a few of them out before we close. I feel a little intimidated as these are huge challenges or huge changes with many unknowns. I see human agency rising and at the core. Digital technologies-based revolution and transformation in the picture depicted. I sense a collective willingness to unlearn. I sense the emergence of deep listening. Aspiration, anticipation, amalgamation. I see change. I see themes from the 2020 HDR undergirding much of what we see here: equity, innovation, and stewardship as the fundamental components of human agency. I see the need to move from here to there. I sense the desire to move. I feel challenged to reach for a higher purpose. Mindset change. I see a black hole up top that threatens to destroy what we have created so far if we do not become agent of change. I feel encouraged to make the steps in the direction of transformation, starting with being differently in the spaces I occupy. I see a clash. What needs to die has not fully died yet. What needs to be born, not fully born yet. I see enticement and stimulation and visual palatability. I sense that there's a lot I don't know and that I need to ask more questions. I feel hopeful and worried about the discipline I need to impose to be more courageous. Thank you all for taking this moment together. I know there are more coming in, but I'd like to honor our time and pass it back over to Laurel to close us out.
Thank you, Antoinette, Otto. Thank you, everyone. I think courage and relevance are two words that came up towards the end. Thank you all. Let's embrace that and the collective that we've created here. What I want to say very quickly is that if you haven't registered, and this is maybe not the most exciting thing I can say, but it's important. If you haven't registered in the Spark Blue space for the transformation space, sparkblue.org/transformation, please do, because that's the way that we want to reach out to you. We want to hold a series of smaller discussions, co-design sessions, opportunities, thank you, Nina, opportunities for us to really think through how we want to build and continue the momentum, continue the movement that we've created here. So please do that. We will be having a discussion and insight and learnings dialogue in July. And what we want to be able to do in that is hear back from the colleagues who have been part of the Action Learning Lab. So many of you actually are part of that learning lab. It's been a tremendous experience, and we want to create that as an opportunity for colleagues to share back their insights. It also helps us develop the next phases. What we have sensed going forward, and these are conversations that we've had with the Presencing Institute and a number of you as well too, is that we want to be able to go deeper into areas where there is a real opportunity for us to apply in our development, humanitarian, peace building practice. So that is a next stage for us. There has been a particular resonance in crisis and post-crisis settings. We want to think more about that together. And there's actually been quite tremendous work in food systems as one example, where we think we can also move further as a collective. So that's the objective. We want to continue to build the breadth and the movement behind this. We want to go a little bit deeper in terms of the application. The labs give us an opportunity to learn more, and we want to push it forward. We want to do that with you. So we're going to be reaching out to you, inviting you, reach out to us. You can always email me. You can email any of us. I hope that that's always clear to everybody. There's the last thing we want is verticalities in a space like this. So I really want to thank you all. It's been a tremendous 6 months. Please stay tuned. Please keep sharing your ideas. Please move ahead with courage, empowerment, and know that you have the support of this group. And let's continue. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. We can unmute and say goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. You guys are brilliant.
Much.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Goodbye.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everyone.
day.
Wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you all. Bye.
See you later in Bhutan, Otto.
Yeah,
Online, at least.
I was just thinking about that, Jürgen.
The small world. So
Small
I will
world.
sleep. So for me, I'll see you next morning. For you, I think it's just later in the day, right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, it will be a great session. By the way, I met the moderator, Tashi. She's a very lovely person.
Okay.
And I told her a little bit about you and TheoryU and our collaboration at UNDP. So everyone is excited for your session.
And so am I. Thank you so much. Looking forward to reconnect there.
Excellent. All the best. Have a great day. Bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
I will close the Zoom call here, and I believe you're having a meeting on a different Zoom call, correct?
I think so. Little AAR.